Chapter 28 of Plain Tales from the Hills. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Harris. Plain Tales from the Hills by Rudyard Kipling. Chapter 28. Venus Anadomini. And the years went on, as the years must do, but our great Diana was always new, fresh and blooming and blonde and fair, with azure eyes and with aureate hair, and all the folk, as they came or went, offered her praise to her heart's content. Diana of Ephesus. She had nothing to do with number 18 in the Braccio Nuovo of the Vatican, between Visconti's Ceres and the god of the Nile. She was purely an Indian deity, an Anglo-Indian deity, that is to say, and we called her the Venus Anadomini, to distinguish her from the other Anadomines of the same everlasting order. There was a legend among the hills that she had once been young, but no living man was prepared to come forward and say boldly that the legend was true. Men rode up to Simla and stayed, and went away and made their name and did their life's work, and returned again to find the Venus Anadomini exactly as they had left her. She was as immutable as the hills, but not quite so green. All that a girl of 18 could do in the way of riding, walking, dancing, picnicking, and overexertion generally, the Venus Anadomini did, and showed no sign of fatigue or a trace of weariness. Besides perpetual youth, she had discovered, men said, the secret of perpetual health, and her fame spread about the land. From a mere woman she grew to be an institution, insomuch that no young man could be said to be properly formed who had not at some time or another worshipped at the shrine of the Venus Anadomini. There was no one like her, though there were many imitations. 6 years in her eyes were no more than 6 months in ordinary women, and 10 made less visible impression on her than does a week's fever on an ordinary woman. Everyone adored her, and in return she was pleasant and courteous to nearly everyone. Youth had been a habit of hers for so long that she could not part with it, never realized, in fact, the necessity of parting with it, and took for her more chosen associates young people. Among the worshippers of the Venus Anadomini was young Gayerson. Very young Gayerson he was called, to distinguish him from his father, young Gayerson, a Bengal civilian, who affected the customs, as he had the heart, of youth. Very young Gayerson was not content to worship placidly and for form's sake as the other young men did, or to accept a ride or a dance or a talk from the Venus Anadomini in a properly humble and thankful spirit. He was exacting, and therefore the Venus Anadomini repressed him. He worried himself nearly sick in a futile sort of way over her, and his devotion and earnestness made him appear either shy or boisterous or rude, as his mood might vary, by the side of the older men who, with him, bowed before the Venus Anadomini. She was sorry for him. He reminded her of a lad who 23 years ago had professed a boundless devotion for her, and for whom in return she had felt something more than a week's weakness. But that lad had fallen away and married another woman less than a year after he had worshipped her, and the Venus Anadomini had almost, not quite, forgotten his name. Very young Gayerson had the same big blue eyes and the same way of pouting his underlip when he was excited or troubled, but the Venus Anadomini checked him sternly none the less. Too much zeal was a thing that she did not approve of, preferring instead a tempered and sober tenderness. Very young Gayerson was miserable and took no trouble to conceal his wretchedness. He was in the army, a line regiment, I think, but I am not certain, and since his face was a looking-glass and his forehead an open book, by reason of his innocence, his brothers in arms made his life a burden to him and embittered his naturally sweet disposition. No one except very young Gayerson, and he never told his views, knew how old very young Gayerson believed the Venus Anadomini to be. Perhaps he thought her 25, or perhaps she told him that she was this age. Very young Gayerson would have forded the Gugger flood to carry her lightest word, and had implicit faith in her. Everyone liked him, and everyone was sorry when they saw him so bound a slave of the Venus Anadomini. Everyone, too, admitted that it was not her fault, for the Venus Anadomini differed from Mrs. Hawksby and Mrs. Reaver in this particular. She never moved a finger to attract anyone. But, like Ninon de l'Enclos, all men were attracted to her. One could admire and respect Mrs. Hauksbee, despise and avoid Mrs. Reaver, but one was forced to adore the Venus Annodomini. Very young Garrison's papa held a division or a collectorate or something administrative in a particularly unpleasant part of Bengal, full of baboos who edited newspapers proving that young Garrison was a Nero and a Scylla and a Charybdis, and in addition to the baboos there was a good deal of dysentery and cholera abroad for 9 months of the year. Young Garrison, who was about 45, rather liked baboos, they amused him, but he objects to dysentery, and when he could get away went to Darjeeling for the most part. This particular season he fancied that he'd come up to Simla and see his boy. The boy was not altogether pleased. He told the Venus Annodomini that his father was coming up, and she flushed a little, and said that she would be delighted to make his acquaintance. Then she looked long and thoughtfully at very young Garrison, because she was very, very sorry for him, and he was a very, very big idiot. "My daughter is coming out in a fortnight, Mr. Garrison," she said. "Your what?" said he. "Daughter," said the Venus Annodomini. "She's been out for a year at home already, and I want her to see a little of India. She's 19 and very sensible. Nice girl, I believe." Very young Garrison, who was a short 22 years old, nearly fell out of his chair with astonishment, for he had persisted in believing, against all belief, in the youth of the Venus Annodomini. She, with her back to the curtained window, watched the effect of her sentences and smiled. Very young Garrison's papa came up 12 days later, and had not been in Simla 24 hours before 2 men, old acquaintances of his, had told him how very young Garrison had been conducting himself. Young Garrison laughed a good deal, and inquired who the Venus Annodomini might be, which proves that he had been living in Bengal, where nobody knows anything except the rate of exchange. Then he said boys will be boys, and spoke to his son about the matter. Very young Garrison said that he felt wretched and unhappy, and young Garrison said that he repented of having helped to bring a fool in the world. He suggested that his son had better cut his leave short and go down to his duties. This led to an unfilial answer, and relations were strained until young Garrison demanded that they should call on the Venus Annodomini. Very young Garrison went with his papa, feeling somehow uncomfortable and small. When Venus Annodomini received them graciously, and young Garrison said, "By Jove, it's Kitty!" Very young Garrison would have listened for an explanation, if his time had not been taken up with trying to talk to a large, handsome, quiet, well-dressed girl, introduced to him by the Venus Annodomini as her daughter. She was far older in manners, style, and repose than very young Garrison, and, as he realized this thing, he felt sick. Presently he heard the Venus Annodomini say, "Do you know that your son is one of my most devoted admirers?" "I don't wonder," said young Garrison. Here he raised his voice. "He follows his father's footsteps. Didn't I worship the ground you trod on ever so long ago, Kitty? And you haven't changed since then. How strange it all seems." Very young Garrison said nothing. His conversation with the daughter of the Venus Annodomini was, through the rest of the call, fragmentary and disjointed. "At 5 tomorrow, then," said the Venus Annodomini. "And mind you are punctual." "At 5 punctual," said young Garrison. "You can lend your old father a horse, I dare say, youngster. Can't you? I'm going for a ride tomorrow afternoon." "Certainly," said very young Garrison. "I'm going down tomorrow morning. My ponies are at your service, sir." The Venus Annodomini looked at him across the half-light of the room, and her big grey eyes filled with moisture. She rose and shook hands with him. "Good-bye, Tom," whispered the Venus Annodomini. End of Chapter 28. The Venus Annodomini. Recording by Mike Harris.